Jake had been mopping floors at the Galactic Trade Center for 3 years now. It wasn't glamorous work, but it paid the bills. Most nights he worked alone, pushing his cart through empty hallways while the rest of the city slept. The aliens who ran the facility barely noticed him. To them, he was just another human doing the jobs nobody else wanted. Tonight felt different though. The building was quieter than usual. Some big diplomatic event had ended hours ago, and the cleanup crew had already cleared the main halls. Jake was assigned to the executive wing, where the really important aliens conducted their business. He'd only been up here a handful of times. The floors were made of some kind of imported stone that cost more than Jake made in a year. He could see his reflection perfectly as he worked, which meant he was doing his job right. His supervisor was strict about that. One streak, one smudge, and you'd hear about it for a week. Jake was halfway down the corridor when he heard it. A sound so faint he almost missed it over the hum of the building's air system. Crying. Soft, muffled, like someone trying very hard not to be heard. He stopped mopping and listened. There it was again, coming from behind one of the storage room doors. His first instinct was to keep walking. Staff weren't supposed to open those doors without authorization. The rules were clear and Jake had never been one to break them. But something about that crying tugged at him. It sounded young. Scared. Jake looked both ways down the empty hallway, then tried the door handle. It wasn't locked. He pushed it open slowly. Inside, tucked between supply crates and cleaning equipment, sat a small alien girl. She couldn't have been more than 7 or 8 years old, though Jake wasn't great at guessing ages with non-humans. Her skin had a faint lavender tint, and she wore robes that looked incredibly expensive, covered in golden embroidery and symbols he didn't recognize. She looked up when he entered, her eyes going wide with fear. Fresh tears rolled down her cheeks. "Whoa, hey, it's okay," Jake said softly, holding up his hands to show he meant no harm. "I'm not gonna hurt you. Are you lost?" The girl opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. Instead, the small device attached to her collar crackled with static and went dark. She looked down at it in panic, tapping it desperately with her small fingers. When it didn't respond, she started crying harder. Jake's heart sank. The translator was broken. She couldn't understand him and he couldn't understand her. He should call security. That was the protocol. But something stopped him. Maybe it was the way she was trembling or how small she looked in that storage room, or the fact that she was wearing what were clearly ceremonial robes and had somehow ended up alone and terrified in a janitor's closet. Instead of reaching for his radio, Jake slowly sat down on the floor a few feet away from her. He made himself smaller, less threatening. The girl watched him with wide, uncertain eyes. Jake pulled his lunch bag from his cart. He packed a sandwich that morning, nothing fancy, just ham and cheese. He unwrapped it slowly, making sure his movements were gentle and predictable. Then he broke it in half and held one piece out to her. "You hungry?" he asked, even though he knew she couldn't understand the words. But tone mattered. His grandmother always said you could tell more from how someone spoke than what they said. The girl stared at the sandwich, then at him, then back at the sandwich. Slowly, hesitantly, she reached out and took it. She sniffed it first, which made Jake smile. "Smart kid. Don't eat strange alien food without checking it first." She took a small bite, then a bigger one. She must have been starving. Jake ate his half too, trying to make it seem normal, like they were just two people sharing a meal. The girl stopped crying. She even managed a tiny smile between bites. For the next few minutes, they sat there together in comfortable silence. Jake showed her his work badge, pointed to himself and said, "Jake," slowly. She seemed to understand that was his name. She pointed to herself and said something that sounded like, "Kessa," though he couldn't be sure. Jake pulled out his phone and showed her pictures, trying to make her laugh. The funny cat video did the trick. Her laugh was like little bells, light and musical. He was just starting to think maybe he could find someone who spoke her language when he heard heavy footsteps in the hallway outside. Lots of them. Running. The door burst open with such force it slammed against the wall. Commander Price stood there, his face twisted in fury, with 6 security guards behind him. They all had their weapons drawn. "Freeze!" Price shouted. "Step away from her right now." Jake shot to his feet, hands up. "Wait, she was lost. You were just violating about 15 different security protocols." Price stormed into the room, putting himself between Jake and the girl. "Do you have any idea who that is?" She was crying, her translator is broken. "I don't care if she was on fire. You don't touch VIPs. You don't even look at them without clearance." Price turned to his guards. "Get him out of here. Now." "But I was helping." 2 guards grabbed Jake's arms. He didn't resist, but his mind was racing. This was bad. Really bad. The little girl was on her feet now, trying to push past Commander Price. She was pointing at Jake, trying to explain something, but without her translator, all that came out were frustrated sounds in her own language. Price ignored her completely. "Jake Morrison, you're terminated effective immediately," Price said coldly. "Your work permit is revoked, and you're banned from all galactic facilities. You'll be flagged in the system as a security risk." "A security risk?" I gave her half my sandwich. "You approached a VIP without authorization. That's grounds for permanent blacklisting." They dragged Jake backward toward the door. He could see the little girl still trying to explain, tears streaming down her face again. She looked even more scared than when he'd found her. "She's trying to tell you something," Jake shouted as they pulled him into the hallway. "Silence," Price barked. "Get him out of my building." The guards hauled Jake through the corridors he'd just been cleaning. Other staff members peeked out from doorways, whispering as he passed. By the time they reached the lobby, everyone would know. Jake Morrison, the guy who got fired for talking to an alien kid. They threw him out the front entrance onto the street. The night air was cold. Jake caught himself against a wall and watched as one of the guards took his badge and snapped it in half. "Don't come back," the guard said. The doors closed, locking with a heavy electronic thunk. Jake stood there for a long moment, trying to process what had just happened. His job, his reputation, his future. All gone because he'd helped a scared child. He thought about the little girl, probably still crying, still trying to make someone understand that he hadn't hurt her. That he'd been kind. But kindness didn't matter in a galaxy where humans were barely tolerated. Where rules mattered more than people. Jake pulled his jacket tighter and started the long walk home. Jake's apartment was on the 7th floor of a building that had seen better days. The elevator was broken again, so he climbed the stairs slowly, each step feeling heavier than the last. By the time he reached his door, the sun was starting to rise, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that he was too tired to appreciate. He collapsed onto his couch without bothering to turn on the lights. His phone buzzed. A message from the employment office. His work permit had been officially revoked. He was now flagged in the system as a security risk, which meant no legitimate employer in the galactic sector would hire him. 3 years of showing up on time, never missing a shift, keeping his head down and doing good work. All of it erased in one night because he'd given a scared kid half a sandwich. Jake didn't sleep. He couldn't. His mind kept replaying the scene over and over. The way Commander Price had looked at him like he was garbage. The way the little girl had tried to explain, her words lost without her translator. The cold certainty in Price's voice when he banned Jake from every facility in the network. When proper morning came, Jake forced himself to get up. He made coffee and sat at his tiny kitchen table with his laptop, pulling up job listings. The galactic facilities paid the best, but those were all closed to him now. He scrolled through the human-only positions. Warehouse work, dishwashing, street cleaning. Everything paid half what he'd been making, and even those jobs required references. He started applying anyway. By noon, he'd sent out 20 applications. By evening, he'd received 15 rejections. The others never responded at all. His neighbor, an older woman named Betty who lived across the hall, knocked on his door around dinner time. She'd heard what happened. News traveled fast in the human district. "I made too much stew," she said, holding out a container that clearly held her entire dinner. "Thought you might be hungry." Jake's throat tightened. "Betty, I can't." "You can and you will. That's what neighbors do." She pressed the container into his hands. "My grandson works down at the docks. I'll ask if they're hiring." "Thank you," Jake managed. She patted his arm and shuffled back to her apartment, moving slowly on legs that had carried her through 80-some years of life on Earth. Jake ate the stew. Was good. It made him feel worse somehow, knowing Betty had so little but still wanted to share. The second day was harder. Jake woke up to an eviction notice slipped under his door. He had 2 weeks to come up with rent or he'd be out on the street. His savings would cover maybe 1 month if he stopped eating. After that, nothing. He put on his best shirt and went out looking for work in person. The managers at 3 different restaurants told him the same thing. They'd love to hire him, but that flag in the system made it impossible. Insurance wouldn't cover employees with security violations. Corporate policy. Nothing personal. By the 4th place, Jake stopped asking. He could see it in their faces the moment they pulled up his file. That little wince. The apologetic smile. The carefully worded rejection. He walked through the human district as the afternoon faded. It was a strange part of the city, tucked between the gleaming towers where aliens conducted business and the automated factories that ran themselves. Humans lived here because the rent was cheap and nobody important cared what happened in these blocks. Kids played in the street, their laughter echoing off narrow buildings. An old man sold fruit from a cart, his prices just low enough that people could afford to eat. A group of women sat on a stoop, talking and watching the neighborhood. They nodded at Jake as he passed. He nodded back. This was home. Not because it was nice but because it was theirs. The only place in the city where humans looked out for each other because nobody else would. Jake stopped at a corner store and counted the coins in his pocket. Enough for instant noodles and not much else. The owner, a man named Tom who'd run the shop for 20 years, waved away his money. "Pay me next week," Tom said. "I don't know if I can." "Next week, Jake. Don't worry about it." That was the thing about the human district. People here understood struggle. They'd all been where Jake was now. Some of them multiple times. The third day was the worst. Jake had no more applications to send. No more places to visit. He'd exhausted every option he could think of. His phone sat silent on the table. No calls. No messages. Nothing. He thought about leaving the city entirely. Heading out to the farming colonies where they were less picky about hiring. But travel cost money he didn't have and the colonies were rough. People disappeared out there sometimes. Worked to death in fields that stretched to the horizon, growing food for aliens who'd never set foot in dirt. At least here he had neighbors. He had Betty's stew and Tom's credit and the kids playing in the street. It wasn't much but it was something. That evening, Jake climbed to the roof of his building. It was his favorite spot, the only place where you could see the sky without craning your neck around alien architecture. A few other residents were up there too, sitting in old chairs and talking quietly. They made space for him without asking what was wrong. They already knew. Jake sat on the ledge, legs dangling over the side, and watched the city lights flicker on as darkness fell. In the distance, the Galactic Trade Center gleamed like a jewel, all polished stone and flowing designs. He'd helped build that shine, one mopped floor at a time. And now he'd never set foot in there again. He thought about the little girl. Wondered if she was okay. If she'd made it back to her family. If anyone had fixed her translator. He hoped so. At least his job loss would have meant something if she was safe and happy somewhere. The wind picked up, carrying the smell of cooking food from the apartments below. Someone's radio played music, old Earth songs from before the aliens came. A baby cried. A couple argued. Life continued, messy and loud and real. Jake pulled his jacket tighter and stayed on the roof until the stars came out. There weren't many visible through the city's light pollution, but if you looked hard enough you could see a few. Distant suns with their own planets. Maybe their own problems. He wondered if kindness mattered out there. If there were places in the galaxy where helping a scared kid was celebrated instead of punished. Where doing the right thing didn't cost you everything. Probably not. The universe didn't work that way. Tomorrow he'd figure something out. He had to. But tonight, he just sat and watched the stars and tried not to think about the eviction notice waiting in his apartment. Tomorrow. He'd deal with it all tomorrow. Jake woke up on the third night to a sound he'd never heard before. A deep, thrumming vibration that made the windows rattle and the floors shake. He stumbled out of bed, half asleep, thinking maybe it was an earthquake or some kind of industrial accident at the factories. Then he heard the screaming outside. Not scared screaming. Excited screaming. The kind of noise people make when something impossible is happening right in front of them. Jake rushed to his window and looked out. His brain couldn't process what he was seeing at first. The entire street was bathed in brilliant white light, bright as noon despite it being past midnight. People were pouring out of buildings, pointing up at the sky with their phones out, recording everything. Hovering above the human district, impossibly huge and gleaming like polished silver, was a royal starship. Jake had seen pictures of ships like this in news feeds but never in person. They didn't come to places like this. Royal vessels visited government centers, diplomatic zones, places that mattered. They definitely didn't park themselves over crumbling apartment buildings in the human quarter. The ship was beautiful in a way that made his chest ache. Smooth curves and elegant lines, with symbols etched into the hull that glowed with soft blue light. It had to be at least 3 blocks long, blocking out the stars. Landing struts extended from the bottom with mechanical precision. The street lights flickered and died as the ship's systems interfered with the local power grid. Someone's car alarm started blaring. A dog barked frantically. Jake pulled on his jeans and shoes, not bothering with a shirt, and ran for the stairs. By the time he reached the street, half the neighborhood was already outside. Betty stood in her nightgown, hands clasped over her mouth. Tom from the corner store had his arm around his wife, both of them staring upward. The kids who usually played in the street clung to their parents, eyes wide with wonder and fear. A loading ramp descended from the ship's belly with a hiss of hydraulics. Lights illuminated its surface, creating a path of pure white against the darkness. Everyone took a step back. Jake did too, his heart hammering so hard he could feel it in his throat. Figures appeared at the top of the ramp. Soldiers, Jake realized. Wearing armor that looked like it cost more than his entire building. They carried weapons that hummed with barely contained energy. 6 of them marched down in perfect formation, their boots hitting the pavement with synchronized precision. The crowd murmured nervously. Soldiers meant trouble. Soldiers meant someone was in serious danger. "We seek Jake Morrison," one of them announced, his voice amplified by his helmet. "Jake Morrison, make yourself known immediately." Jake's stomach dropped through the floor. Every eye on the street turned to look at him. Betty gasped. Tom's mouth fell open. This was it. They decided firing him wasn't enough. They were going to arrest him. Make an example of him. He'd heard stories about humans who broke the wrong rules, who offended the wrong aliens. They disappeared into detention centers and came out different if they came out at all. His legs felt like water, but he forced himself to step forward. "I'm Jake Morrison." The soldiers moved toward him instantly, surrounding him in a circle of armor and weapons. Jake raised his hands, trying to show he wasn't a threat. Trying not to panic. "Come with us," the lead soldier said. "Look, whatever you think I did." Now. It wasn't a request. They walked him toward the ramp. Jake glanced back at his neighbors. Betty had tears running down her face. Tom shook his head slowly like he was watching a funeral. The kids stared with frightened eyes. Jake wanted to tell them he was sorry. Sorry for bringing this trouble to their street. Sorry for whatever was about to happen. But the soldiers kept him moving, and then he was on the ramp, climbing into the ship, leaving behind everything he'd ever known. The interior was beyond anything Jake had imagined. The walls seemed to glow from within, creating light without visible sources. The air smelled clean, filtered and perfect. His bare feet sank into flooring that adjusted to his weight, cushioning every step. Everything was smooth and seamless, like the ship had been grown rather than built. They led him through corridors that curved in ways that shouldn't have been possible, past windows that showed impossible views of space. Other aliens moved through the halls, wearing robes and uniforms Jake didn't recognize. They glanced at him as he passed, some curious, some dismissive. Finally, the soldier stopped in front of a door that shimmered like oil on water. It opened without anyone touching it, revealing a room that took Jake's breath away. It was decorated in styles from a dozen worlds, with furniture that seemed to float and walls displaying slowly shifting patterns of light. But Jake barely noticed any of that. In the center of the room stood a woman who could only be royalty. She was tall, with the same lavender-tinted skin as the little girl from the storage room. She wore robes that flowed around her like liquid silver, covered in the same golden embroidery and symbols. Her presence filled the space in a way Jake couldn't quite explain. When she looked at him, he felt pinned in place by eyes that had witnessed things he couldn't imagine. "Jake Morrison," she said, and her voice was like music, each word perfectly pronounced. "I am Ambassador Lyria of the Valerian Empire. I believe you met my daughter 3 nights ago." Jake's mind went blank. Daughter. Ambassador. Valerian Empire. The little girl in the storage room had been a princess. An actual princess. And he'd given her half a ham sandwich. Yes, he managed. "Is she okay?" Her translator was broken, and I just wanted to help. "My daughter is well, thanks to you." Lyria moved closer, and Jake noticed she had the same musical laugh as the little girl. "When we found her, she told me everything. How frightened she was. How lost. How a kind human sat with her and shared his food and made her feel safe until help arrived." Jake didn't know what to say. The soldiers had withdrawn to the edges of the room, giving them space. "I have been searching for you for 3 days, Lyria continued. "My daughter knew your name but not where you lived. The trade center was less than helpful. In fact, they were quite obstinate about releasing any information. They fired me," Jake said quietly, "for helping her." Lyria's expression changed. Something cold and dangerous flashed across her face. "Explain." So Jake did. He told her everything. About finding the little girl crying, about sharing his lunch, about Commander Price bursting in and calling him a security risk. About being blacklisted and banned and flagged in the system. About the eviction notice and the rejected job applications and Betty's stew. By the time he finished, Lyria's hands were clenched at her sides. She turned to one of her attendants and spoke in rapid Valerian. The attendant bowed and hurried from the room. "This is unacceptable," Lyria said, switching back to perfect English. In my culture, those who protect royal children are honored above almost all others. To punish such an act is... She paused, searching for the right word. Unforgivable. I didn't know she was a princess, Jake said. I just saw a scared kid. Lyria smiled then, soft and genuine. That is precisely why my daughter was safe with you. You saw her as a child in need, not as a political asset or a danger to yourself. You risked your livelihood to offer comfort to a stranger. She placed a hand on his shoulder. Jake Morrison, my people have a saying. The measure of a person's worth is found in what they do when no reward is offered. You have proven yourself worthy of far more than mopping floors. Jake didn't understand. What do you mean? I mean, Lyria said, that everything is about to change. Lyria gestured for Jake to sit. The chair adjusted to his body the moment he touched it, more comfortable than anything he'd ever experienced. She remained standing, her robe shifting colors in the light, from silver to gold to something in between. Tell me about the Galactic Trade Center, she said. How do they treat human employees? Jake hesitated. You didn't complain about work conditions to alien royalty. That was asking for trouble. But something in Lyria's expression told him she genuinely wanted to know. It's a job, he said carefully. The pay is better than most places that hire humans. That is not what I asked. Jake sighed. They treat us like we're invisible. We clean their floors, haul their garbage, fix things when they break. They walk past us like we're furniture. And the rules are different for us. Stricter. An alien employee can be 5 minutes late and nobody cares. A human shows up 3 minutes late and it goes in their permanent file. And if you complain? You don't complain. Humans who complain lose their jobs. There's always 10 more waiting to take your place. Lyria's jaw tightened. I see. And Commander Price, the one who terminated your employment. Tell me about him. He's head of security. Been there for years. He doesn't like humans much, but most of the alien staff don't. We're just tolerated. Useful for the work nobody else wants to do. How many human employees work at the trade center? Jake thought about it. Maybe 200? Janitors, maintenance workers, kitchen staff, loading dock crews. All the behind-the-scenes jobs. And how many have been terminated for minor infractions? I don't know exact numbers, but I knew at least 4 people who got fired my first year alone. One guy accidentally bumped into an alien diplomat while carrying boxes. Gone the next day. A woman asked for a bathroom break during a 12-hour shift. Fired for insubordination. Lyria turned to one of her attendants and spoke in Valerian. The attendant's face went pale, and he bowed deeply before leaving the room. When she looked back at Jake, her expression had shifted into something that reminded him of stone. The Valerian Empire maintains 7 major trade contracts with your Galactic Trade Center, she said. Together, they represent approximately 40% of the facility's annual revenue. Do you know what happens if we withdraw those contracts? Jake's eyes widened. The facility would probably shut down. Not probably. Certainly. Lyria pulled out a communication device that looked like a flat piece of crystal. I'm going to contact Director Chin right now. You will listen. She tapped the crystal and a holographic display appeared in the air. After 2 tones, a face materialized in the projection. A middle-aged alien with sharp features and small, calculating eyes. He looked annoyed at being contacted so late. Ambassador Lyria, this is unexpected. How can I? Director Chin, I will be brief. 3 days ago, one of your employees, Jake Morrison, was terminated for helping my daughter when she was lost and frightened in your facility. The director's expression went from annoyed to confused to horrified in the span of 3 seconds. Your daughter? Princess Kessa. She wandered away from our diplomatic party. Her translator malfunctioned. She was crying in a storage room when your employee found her. He gave her food, comforted her, and stayed with her until she was found. For this act of kindness he was fired, blacklisted, and flagged as a security risk. Ambassador, I'm certain there's been a misunderstanding. There has been no misunderstanding. I have Jake Morrison here with me now. He has explained exactly what happened. Commander Price terminated him for approaching a VIP without authorization. Is this accurate? The director's face had gone pale. I will need to review the incident report. You will do more than review it. You will reinstate Jake Morrison with a formal apology, or I will withdraw every Valerian contract from your facility effective immediately. You have until morning to decide. Ambassador, please, if we had known. You should not need to know who a child's parents are to treat kindness with respect rather than punishment. The fact that you would fire an employee for helping a frightened child tells me everything I need to know about your facility's values. We can reinstate him immediately, of course, with full back pay and... Lyria held up her hand. I'm not finished. I want a full review of every human employee termination from the past 5 years. I want documentation of all disciplinary actions taken against human staff compared to alien staff for similar infractions. And I want it on my desk within 1 week. The director was sweating now. That will take considerable time. Then I suggest you start immediately. Additionally, Commander Price will be removed from his position. I will not have my daughter's protector punished while the man who did the punishing continues in authority. Ambassador, I understand you're upset, but Commander Price has been with us for 15 years. Then he has had 15 years to learn that compassion is not a crime. He has failed. Remove him or I remove my contracts. Those are your only options. The hologram flickered as the director struggled for words. This will cause significant disruption to our operations. Good. Perhaps disruption is what you need. Lyria's voice could have cut glass. My people have a saying, Director Chin. A society that punishes kindness deserves neither prosperity nor peace. You have until dawn. Choose wisely. She ended the call without waiting for a response. The hologram dissolved into nothing. Jake sat in stunned silence. He just watched an alien ambassador threaten to destroy an entire facility's economy. For him. For a human janitor who made minimum wage and lived in a 7th-floor walk-up. You didn't have to do that, he said quietly. Yes, I did. Lyria turned to face him. In Valerian culture, those who harm protectors of royal children face severe consequences. Commander Price is fortunate I am only requesting his demotion. By our laws I could demand far worse. But I'm nobody. Just some guy who... You are the man who saw my daughter as a person in need rather than a political complication. Do you understand how rare that is? Lyria moved closer and her eyes were fierce. In the 3 days I have been searching for you, I have learned much about how humans are treated in this city. What I have learned disgusts me. Jake didn't know what to say. His whole world had turned upside down in the span of 20 minutes. The trade center will call you before morning, Lyria continued. They will offer you your job back. They will apologize. They will promise things will be different. And should I believe them? No. Lyria smiled, and it was not a kind smile. Because you will not be returning to that job. I have a different offer for you. What kind of offer? The Valerian embassy requires a cultural liaison. Someone who understands both human and alien perspectives. Someone who has demonstrated sound judgment and genuine compassion. Someone who knows what it is like to be overlooked and underestimated. She paused. The position pays more in 1 month than you made in a year at the trade center. You would have full diplomatic status, embassy housing, and the authority to advocate for better treatment of human workers throughout the galactic sector. Jake's heart was racing. You're offering me a job? A real job. I am offering you a purpose. Lyria extended her hand. What do you say, Jake Morrison? Are you ready for everything to change? Jake looked at her hand, then at her face. 3 days ago he'd been mopping floors and wondering how he'd pay rent. Now an alien ambassador was offering him a chance to make a real difference. He thought about Betty and Tom and all his neighbors in the human district. About the 200 workers at the trade center who showed up every day to jobs where they were invisible. About every human who'd been fired for minor mistakes while alien employees got second and third chances. Jake reached out and shook her hand. Yes, he said. I'm ready. Jake's new apartment at the Valerian embassy was larger than his entire old building. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city, showing a view he'd only ever seen in photographs. The furniture adjusted to his presence, the temperature regulated itself, and the bathroom had a shower with 17 different settings he was still figuring out. But the strangest part wasn't the luxury. It was waking up without the weight of worry pressing down on his chest. His first official day started early. Lyria met him in her office, a circular room with walls that displayed slowly shifting images of Valoria's 3 moons. She handed him a tablet containing his new credentials. You have full diplomatic immunity, she explained. Your identification grants you access to any galactic facility in the sector. Use it wisely. Jake stared at the credentials. 3 days ago he'd been flagged as a security risk. Now he had diplomatic immunity. The universe had a twisted sense of humor. What exactly does a cultural liaison do? He asked. Whatever needs doing. Lyria smiled. Today you have a ceremony to attend. My daughter wishes to thank you properly. The ceremony was held in the embassy's main hall, a space so grand that Jake's footsteps echoed. Dozens of Valerian officials lined the walls in their formal robes. News drones hovered near the ceiling, recording everything. Jake had never been in front of cameras before. Made his skin itch. Then the doors at the far end opened and the little girl walked in. She wore a dress that sparkled like starlight, her hair braided with golden thread. But her face was the same. Those wide eyes that had been so frightened in the storage room now shone with excitement. When she saw Jake, she broke into a run, ignoring the formal protocol her attendants were clearly expecting. "Jake!" she shouted, her translator working perfectly now. She crashed into him with a hug that nearly knocked him over. Jake laughed and hugged her back, not caring that every camera in the room was recording it. "Hey Kessa. You doing okay?" "I'm good. My translator works now, see?" She tapped the device on her collar proudly. "I can talk to you for real." "That's great, kid." Kessa grabbed his hand and dragged him toward the center of the hall, where Lyria waited with an ornate box. The ambassador smiled at her daughter's enthusiasm. "Princess Kessa has prepared a statement," one of the officials announced. Kessa stood up straight, suddenly looking very royal despite being barely 4 feet tall. She spoke clearly, her words translated and broadcast across the galactic network. 3 days ago I was lost and scared. My translator broke and I couldn't tell anyone where my mom was. I thought nobody would help me because I couldn't talk." Her voice wavered slightly. "But then Jake found me. He didn't care that we couldn't understand each other. He sat with me. He shared his food. He made me feel safe." She turned to look at him and Jake saw tears in her eyes. Lots of people walked past that room. I could hear them. But only Jake stopped. Only Jake opened the door. She took a shaky breath. "In my culture we honor those who protect children. Jake protected me when nobody else would. He's a hero." The room erupted in applause. Kessa opened the ornate box and pulled out a medallion on a silver chain. It was beautiful, engraved with symbols that caught the light. "This is the Star of Compassion," she said, standing on her toes to place it around his neck. "Only 20 people in the whole galaxy have one. Now you do too." Jake knelt down so she could reach properly. The medallion was heavier than it looked, warm against his chest. "Thank you, Kessa," he said quietly. "I'm glad you're safe." She hugged him again, whispering in his ear. "I told them you were nice. I told them, but they wouldn't listen. I'm sorry you got in trouble." "It's okay. Everything worked out." The ceremony continued with more formal speeches, but Jake barely heard them. He kept thinking about what Kessa had said. Lots of people walked past that room. But only Jake stopped. After the ceremony, Jake's tablet started buzzing with messages. The first was from Director Chen at the Trade Center. A formal apology, an offer of reinstatement with triple his old salary, a promise that Commander Price had been removed from his position. Jake deleted it without responding. The second message was from a news outlet requesting an interview. Then another. And another. By lunch, he had 47 interview requests. Apparently, the story of a human janitor receiving the Star of Compassion was big news. Lyria found him in his new office, staring at the messages in bewilderment. "Welcome to visibility," she said with amusement. "You are no longer invisible, Jake Morrison. People are watching now. I don't want to be famous. I just want to help." "Good. Then let's discuss how you can do that." She sat across from him, her expression turning serious. "I received the report from the Trade Center this morning. In the past 5 years, they terminated 137 human employees. Do you know how many alien employees they terminated in that same period?" "How many?" 12. "And most of those were for criminal activity." Lyria's eyes hardened. "The disparity is not coincidence. It is policy." Jake felt sick. He'd known things were unfair, but seeing the numbers made it real. "What can we do about it?" "We can start by making noise. You have a platform now. The whole sector is watching the human who earned the Star of Compassion. When you speak, people will listen." Over the next few weeks, Jake learned what it meant to be a cultural liaison. He visited the Trade Center, walking through halls he used to clean, but this time as someone with authority. Workers he'd known for years stared at him in disbelief. Some approached him quietly, sharing stories of mistreatment they'd never dared voice before. A woman named Rita told him about being denied bathroom breaks during 12-hour shifts. A man named David described being written up for asking questions about safety equipment. A young guy named Chris explained how he'd been fired for being sick, losing his work permit and his apartment in the same week. Jake documented everything. Every story. Every injustice. Every time the rules had been applied differently to humans than to aliens. He presented his findings to the Galactic Labor Council, standing in front of officials who'd never given humans a second thought. They tried to dismiss him at first, but Jake had diplomatic immunity now. He had the Star of Compassion around his neck and the full backing of the Valerian Empire behind him. They had to listen. "These aren't just numbers," Jake said, his voice carrying through the council chamber. "These are people. People with families. People who show up every day and work hard and ask for nothing except to be treated fairly." The reforms took months, but they happened. New guidelines for employee treatment. Third-party oversight of termination decisions. Equal application of rules regardless of species. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. Commander Price tried to file a complaint about his demotion. Lyria had it dismissed in under an hour. The trade center slowly changed. Workers started speaking up about problems. Management started listening. It wasn't paradise, but it was better. Measurably better. One evening, 6 months after everything changed, Jake returned to his old neighborhood. He'd been sending money to Betty and Tom, but he wanted to visit in person. The street looked the same, though the potholes had been filled and new lights installed. Betty cried when she opened her door. Tom shook his hand so hard Jake thought his arm might fall off. The kids from the street gathered around, asking if he really lived in an embassy now, if he really met a princess, if the stories on the news were true. "They're true," Jake said. "And I couldn't have done any of it without this neighborhood. Without all of you teaching me what community means." That night, sitting on the same roof where he'd contemplated his future 3 months earlier, Jake pulled out his tablet. Another message from a human worker, this time from a facility on the other side of the sector. They'd heard about the reforms. They wanted to know if Jake could help them too. He could. He would. Jake looked up at the stars, clearer now than they'd been before, and smiled. The universe was still broken in a lot of ways. Humans were still at the bottom of most hierarchies. But things were changing. Slowly, painfully, but really changing. All because he'd stopped to help a scared kid in a storage room. All because he'd chosen kindness when nobody was watching. Jake opened the message and started typing his response. There was work to do, and for the first time in his life he had the power to actually do it. The stars shone overhead, distant and cold and beautiful. And Jake Morrison, former janitor, current cultural liaison, sat beneath them and got to work changing the galaxy one story at a time.